Building a business asks a lot from us: focus, confidence, consistency. But what we do not talk about enough is the internal cost of always being on. Entrepreneurs are often praised for resilience, adaptability, and grit. Yet, many of us listeners, we are quietly managing anxiety, identity fatigue, emotional overload, and this constant pressure to explain ourselves clearly to the world. So, today's conversation on the BizBlend podcast is not about productivity hacks or motivation quotes. It is about mental health practices that actually support entrepreneurs. In what? In staying grounded while communicating who they are and what they do. My guest today, Laura Nicholls. She's a writer, strategist, former therapist, a domestic violence survivor, and a single mother. She spent 14 years working in high level treatment settings with children and teens, and later rebuilt her life and career from the ground up. And she now helps entrepreneurs and thought leaders turn lived experiences into meaningful expression through content, messaging, and books. Her work bridges psychology, creativity, and communication with a strong emphasis on presence and integrity. So, Laura, welcome to BizPlan, and I'm really, really glad that you are here with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate that lovely introduction.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. Okay, to begin with, Laura, a lot of mental health advice, we say, okay, you need to be in present, you need to practice this, practice that. I mean, especially for entrepreneurs, the advice, it sounds good on paper, but under real pressure, it falls apart. So, from your background as a therapist, and now you are a strategist, what mental health practices do you see actually working for entrepreneurs, especially under pressure?
Sure. I think what comes to mind first and foremost is getting back to basics, which starts with, for me, some self awareness. When I was still working in mental health and in these really intense treatment settings, I used to train the staff on what we'd call vicarious trauma, meaning the ways that they could see that their work was coming home with them and showing up in their lives. And some of the check-ins that I would ask them, to run through with themselves would be to, think about your worldview. Are you starting to see things in a way that you didn't before that may or may not always be healthy? Or are you finding yourself more vigilant or reactive? And so even though we're talking about a completely different setting, running a business and being an entrepreneur, it does kind of carry its own version of trauma. And I think that being self-aware is the first place we start. Um, recognizing, like, are you physically present with your family, but you're not actually emotionally present? Are there practices in your life that you used to implement that you don't anymore? Are you lacking joy? There's these telltale signs that we're not, we're not, we're not taking care of ourselves in the way that's ultimately going to drive our vision forward that got us started in the first place. And so when it comes to practices, I also have a background in fitness, and once upon a time, a long time ago, was a trainer, and it kind of reminds me of this world as well, where people, when we talk about there's so much available to us in the self help and the motivation realm, as you touched on. And I think we, especially this time of year, with the beginning of a new year, we get into this idea or this mindset that we have to implement all these things and make these huge drastic changes. And really, it starts so much more simple than that. And when I say that, I mean, after that self-awareness, just bringing in like one or two very simple things. I talk a lot about our nervous systems, and that a lot of us, especially, high level thinkers and entrepreneurs and people who run businesses, tend to think that we need to start with our thinking. I call it, top down regulation, that if we start with our thinking, that everything else will fall into line, when really we need to start from the bottom up, which is our nervous system. And that means taking those moments throughout the day to do some coherent breathing, or getting up in the morning and instead of looking at our phones, which I know gets said a lot, but going outside or looking out a window, not through glass, but, getting some sunlight, in our face as early as we can. Those are very, very simple things that we can do that can make such a big shift and give us a place to start from and avoid this feeling of like, I need to implement all these practices, which is a setup for failure.
I agree. I agree. This kind of, signifies this integration of mind, body, and soul, because not only you're working on not fixing. I shouldn't use the word fixing because it's not broken. Um, but not working on mindset, but physical as well. Your nervous system is into play here. Then soulfully, or maybe spiritually, you're also connecting with you're trying to reconnect with yourself. And Laura, one kind of, as you mentioned about breathing now, especially a new year, like, let's say as a CEO, I am aware that, sometimes my anxiety can shoot up like, oh my goodness, like over the roof. And, I tend to overreact or be very much reactive instead of becoming proactive. Um, and if I am kind of, trying to do breathing maybe before some important meeting or decision or a discussion with the investors, or something has gone wrong with the business or some negative customer feedback. But then maybe it's not working initially. And it's very possible, very much possible that, I'll kind of start judging myself, or maybe I'll be overanalyzing myself. That if I'm not able to accomplish this much, just a simple breathing exercise and the good behind it, then how exactly I'm going to change myself? How exactly I'm going to run my business? So how do you suggest and managing or handling these kind of thoughts or feelings, especially for
I think
entrepreneurs?
those Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think those are very, very common for us as entrepreneurs, right? Because we are in a very like we get hard information back about whether something we're doing is working or not. It's evident in our numbers or, our audience behavior, whatever that looks like. We can slip into kind of black and white thinking in that way. And as you're talking, one of the things that's coming up for me is, one of the most important things that I learned in learning to meditate, for example, was to come out of that judgment, right? Because if you've ever tried to meditate, or anybody listening to this, you know that it can be really hard, especially when your mind is running on 100 things, or if you're trying to breathe or whatever the thing is, to not have the thoughts run, to not have the things come in. And we do get into, we're like athletes in that way. We get into a very like, I'm doing it right or I'm not doing it right. I think that the thinking that we can apply to ourselves in those moments, whether it's breathing or meditation or trying to remember to get up and go get some sun in your face in the morning, um, is that it's all just information, right? That to just notice it, let it pass, and then you just move on to the next thing. There's this idea of not being preoccupied with what has gone before, staying present in the moment, and not being preoccupied with what's coming. But that mindfulness piece, right? And in that way that we can just notice those things about ourselves. What I was about to say earlier is that it's very similar to me in business. Um, it's there's not a judgment. It's just information. If we take an attitude of curiosity about ourselves, about our business, about our relationships, we are in such a more advantageous position to grow and to take the energy of judgment out of it, whether it's self-judgment or judgment of others. And it's just such a much more productive, fruitful place to be in any area of life, but certainly business.
Hmm. Makes sense. Makes sense. Let's bring in mindfulness. Like, it's often framed as a personal practice. I mean, you mentioned about meditation, then breathing, then there's journaling. Um, so you talk about bringing mindfulness into messaging. How does the way an entrepreneur communicates affect their mental health?
Such a great question. The way an entrepreneur communicates themselves, in their business, whether they're doing it themselves, which some people prefer to, and I've certainly worked with business owners that really like to stay connected to their audience by doing, some of the writing or the content themselves. They feel like that's part of their creative process, which I completely understand. Um, uh, I lost my train of thought a little bit, but could you just repeat the
So
question? I'm sorry.
yeah. So I was curious, like, how does the way an entrepreneur communicates affect their mental health?
Mm. Well, as evolved as we would all like to be and say that we can be somewhat removed from the response of our audiences, it does matter, right? We're ideally, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, we are here to serve. And so in doing that, we are hopefully connected with those we're serving and who we're talking to. And so I think that when you feel as a business owner, whether it's through someone else or you're doing it yourself, connected to that communication to your audience, because no matter what era we're in or the marketing tactics and strategies and all the things, like it really comes down to communication, and it takes on different forms, and it has over the years. But content marketing, and communicating with your clients, your customers, your audience has been around for like hundreds of years, for really. And so when we are aligned in that, in my opinion, it is positive for your mental health. It's how you know that you're achieving what you showed up to do in the first place. And we all like to feel good, and we all like to feel impactful about what we're doing. And when we are misaligned with our communication and our content and how we're talking to our audiences, it just it can be very uncomfortable because for a few reasons. One, because it doesn't work and it doesn't feel good to not have results in your business. And it's just a losing of the heart of what brought you into your business in the first place, which is to bring some product or service, in most cases, to other people. Um, and our vehicle for that is our messaging, our content. That's how we impart the heart of what we do in our service to those we're here to serve.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a basic and I think uh, if message is misaligned, then no amount of SEO or marketing optimization or social media, whatever it is, I mean, it fixes the internal tension. And it sounds like um, clarity is not just being about being understood. It is about not abandoning yourself in the process, not losing the sense of who exactly you are, or what exactly you are envisioning.
Hmm. I think there's a part, I spent a lot of my years in business as a copywriter. And so I've written every kind of sales and marketing content that there is just about. And I think there's just such a sweet spot between not losing, for me as a copywriter, what I really drew energy from, what I really enjoyed was finding that connection between who I was speaking for and who I was speaking to. And so for business owners who are, either thinking about their own messaging, they're doing it themselves, or they have someone supporting it with them, for them, excuse me, there is exactly what you said. Something to be said about not losing yourself and the heart of why you're here in the first place, and also not losing touch with the heart of like who you're talking to and who they are. And that evolves over time. Like as our businesses evolve, our offers, our messaging, so do the people we serve. And I think there is a real balance between keeping a foot in both worlds, staying true to yourself with the view to who you're here for, who you're serving.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. And entrepreneurs are constantly. I mean, this has been now such a part of such an essential part of especially marketing or this personal branding. Like you have to be a good storyteller. Constantly told to their own personal journey or their story. But then uh, because I I personally identify myself as introvert. It can sometimes really feel like exposing or portraying yourself as vulnerable or weak or confusing or even destabilizing. So from your work, how does clarifying one's narrative support mental health rather than threaten it?
This is such a great question. It's something I've really been thinking about lately. I've actually done some writing about this for very recently, like as of last week, because using our narrative and our story is not. new at all. I feel like there's been a real kind of resurgence in the last few years as, we're looking at like how in this trust recession that we're in, right? How do we connect with people? And I think that we have kind of leaned into story based marketing, um,
Mm.
and that's appropriate and that's great. However, where does it cross the line into being a marketing tactic or performative, or even on a personal level, as you mentioned, the word destabilizing. And I think that it's I think there's private work to be done around your narrative as a business owner, and then there's the public facing side. And when it comes to your mental health, I think having a good grasp of that balance is important. When we start to use our story in a way that is either our own therapy, using our audience for our own therapy, or again, it's performative and it feels like you're overexposing, or you start to lose touch with like the heart and the spirit of that narrative. So I think there is a real level of discernment that comes in for what to share and what not to share. Um, and a real connection with like the motive behind how you are using that story and that narrative. I know for me in my own case, I have, without realizing at times, had this compulsion or this feeling that like, oh, for me to be authentic with my audience, I need to share this story. And then kind of pulling back from that and having to really sit with why, like, what is the ultimate goal? And is this audience the right fit for this story? Is it the right time for this story? Have I fully integrated it and has it settled in me in a way that I can productively share it in the right way and the right context so that it serves and isn't, again, performative or trauma dumping or destabilizing, which is such a great word.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you cannot sell an overpriced or a bad product or service and then tell that you come from a very struggling background. You have struggled your whole way. I mean, you're kind of yeah, performative.
hmm I think there's balance in that. I mean, in my experience, we read stories and there's a lot of books that, I'm looking at some on my bookshelf right now that, are about these transformations that people went through because we want to find ourselves in that transformation. But in my experience and in helping people write books and understand their stories and kind of where that comes into the teaching and serving, what I have found is that people connect more to the struggle along the way. Or I shouldn't say more. They connect to that as much as they do finding hope in the transformation because there is something I don't know, there's something to be said about finding yourself in someone else's story, achieving insight and hope that you may not have arrived at yet on your own. Um, and so, I think it is a balance, but yes, we have to be careful about and thoughtful about how we share that story once again, because as you just pointed out, if people want to, if you're sharing your story and then ideally the end part, like how did you get to where you are, the goal there should be to help people who are reading or understanding or listening or whatever the context is to your story feel that they can get there maybe faster than, with less pain and faster than you did because now you're imparting this journey to them. And I think that's the important part is that like owning and understanding and sharing that journey, but not staying there, right? Um,
Exactly.
yeah, communicating that you're on the other side of it, and here's how I got there, and so can you.
Exactly. Exactly. Absolutely, 100%. And before we conclude, I mean, I think this is a very um, you know, very obvious question right now. Like we were use words like it's relatable, it's resonating, it's connecting. Like there's a lot of pressure right now for entrepreneurs to be vulnerable and relatable online. So, uh, from a mental health standpoint, do you see any gap, or like where do you see that it's going wrong if it is?
I mean, so I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and there are times that I read people's stuff and it feels, I don't know, it's just it's like a, I don't know, maybe it's my background as a therapist, but I don't think so. I think it's just being a human that you can sense when something is being shared in an authentic way because it's being shared judiciously. It's not somebody's brand all the time to be talking about. Like, we don't, that's not, I don't know. It's valuable, but that's not what, we want to lead with is constantly our pain because we don't all want to be reminded that there's pain all the time, right? We want to be reminded that there is hope, there is transformation. And so I think I do unfortunately see, and I don't mean to say this in a disparaging or critical way, but I do see sometimes where it gets overused. And it feels, again, to use that word, performative or kind of contrived or even formulaic. And it kind of lacks, it's like when it's overdone, it loses its humanity and it loses it's not as effective. Um, but I think it's more noticeable when you are experiencing somebody's messaging and those pain pieces or those parts of the journey get sprinkled in. That is far more effective because you're kind of, caught up in like the hope of this person or the transformation that you're hoping to undergo by engaging with them. And you're caught up in the energy of that. And then when you find those pieces of humanity that you can connect to, and they're infrequent. It makes them more authentic. It makes them easier to connect to. And again, to use the word that you just used, like relatable. And I agree, we are under a lot of pressure right now in the narrative arc of the internet and social media to be more connective and to be more human. But again, where do we tip the scales into being now it's just another marketing tactic, right? It is definitely carefully managed, in my opinion.
Mhm, mhm. Mm. And uh, how can entrepreneurs share honestly without turning their inner world into a marketing asset? Like, are there any ways or any kind of uh, small check not checks or balances, I must say, I should say, but practices or any approach?
Yeah. I think that comes back to mindfulness and awareness and really checking in around motive, and with any piece of content. Even if we weren't talking about personal narrative, if I go back to my like copywriting world, or if I think about the books that I help people write, it's like a gut check with anything that you share. What is the purpose of this? What is the motivation behind it? Is this just something that I feel compelled personally to share right now, but it doesn't really move the message forward? It doesn't really deliver the service. It doesn't really impact my audience. Then it's probably best kept, for another personal setting. So I just think a real, that's where we kind of get back to those practices of not being so caught up in like the frenzy of our businesses that we are neglecting our self-awareness. That really comes into messaging and being very, very connected to like why are you sharing what you're sharing down to like the last thing, even in our, I don't want to be too nitpicky, but our comments on people's posts or the things that we're sharing on social media or certainly the bigger picture things like our website content or our sales pages, what is the point of what you're sharing? And does it ultimately move the message and the impact in the way that you want it to? Or are we just filling space?
Absolutely. Great, great. So Laura, before we wrap up, if listeners they would like to connect with you further, after this conversation, if they have any their thoughts or opinions, how they can do that. So
Sure. I can always be found over my website, which is lauranicholls.com, and I'm active on LinkedIn. In the last year, I've spent quite a bit of time just developing relationships there and, really practicing what I preach, if you will, and starting to, I wasn't on social media for many, many years. And so it's been an interesting practice for me, to do exactly what we're talking about and connect and build community in an authentic way. Uh, and so I'm over on LinkedIn, just my name, Laura Nicholls, is how I can be found there. And always happy to chat and have conversations. And yeah, just I'm energized by people, conversations, and connections. So I always look forward to that.
Amazing, amazing. So, dear listeners, what I'll do is I'll have all the links and details in the show notes as I do it for all of our conversations, for every one of our conversations on BizBlend. So, just refer to them along with this episode on whichever platform you listen to your podcast to. And you know what? If one thing that we all can take from today, it is this: that clarity, it is not a branding exercise, it is a grounding practice. It is about presence, about knowing your story well enough to stand in it, about communicating from a place that does not cost you your nervous system or your integrity. So, Laura, thank you so much. This was really, really a very enlightening conversation.
Well, thank you. I really appreciated it also.
Super, super. And yeah, so to all the listeners, your voice matters, but so does the state you are in when you use it. Until next time, this is BizBlend with Sana. Take care and I'll catch you in the next episode. Thank you.